everybody knows that homeschooling is a bit of a contentious topic if you are an insane, crazy person. If you are an insane, crazy person, otherwise known as somebody who politically and socially identifies themselves on the left, you look at a child being taught the values that the parent is happy with, that is more wholesome, and that keeps families together. You see families interacting as a unit, as they should, and you think to yourself, this is awful. How do I change this? As the left always does, the left sees the family as the greatest threat to the strength of the state, because the family unit, being the most foundational societal unit in all of civilization, is where strength can come from. If you have strong families and you can't break them up, there's very little the state can do to penetrate into that. So, homeschooling is something that the left has been particularly furious about recently. And recently, it does seem that they are starting to man the battleships, metaphorically speaking, because they have started an all out assault talking about all of the downright terrible and awful things that goes on about homeschooling. And you know that this is happening because, and I will take this is still not working. The mouse has stopped working. Thank you. Because yes, if you go to that link, please, Jack, thank you. As Oron McIntyre was speaking about in his most recent show, which I watched a bit of, which is one of the things that inspired me to do this, John Oliver decided to do a big segment on his television show last week tonight, I think it's called, where he spoke about all of the terrible things to do with modern homeschooling and how it's perfectly fine that you have modern homeschooling. And obviously, it's a family's right to pull their kids out of school if they're black and being taught whitewashed history, or if they're getting bullied because they're a 300-pound monster at the age of 14 and other kids are saying, hey, maybe you should lose some weight. He's saying, obviously, it's perfectly fine if you homeschool your kids if you're doing it for leftist reasons, but look at these insane Christians getting together and teaching their children Christian values and classical values and teaching them not sex, but maths.
Hi folks, we've rolled out a new feature on the website, which is the ability to pay for an individual piece of content. So usually it's £5 a month every month to subscribe to all of the content on the website. But I appreciate there are going to be people who simply don't want to do that. They would be interested instead in purchasing a single piece of content for a lower amount, and they've got a particular niche that they're interested in watching. And so they don't want every single piece of content. They just want this one thing. So we've introduced this function where you can just simply purchase the one thing for £1.89, which I think is about $2.30 at the current exchange rates. And then that's just yours forever. So there's no sort of commitment there. There's no rolling subscription. It's just that one thing. So that's an option now that's on the website. It's completely live. It's completely available. And please go and enjoy it. And we'll see you all very soon.
Can you believe it? They're teaching kids maths and English and their ABCs and reading books that weren't written by sexual perverts.
I don't know about you, but accidentally, this is quite useful. Now, of course, they're going to use state power to crack down on homeschooling.
That's what it seems like they're going to try to do, because not only that, John Oliver is also highlighting, as we'll get onto, some of the lobby groups that are part of American politics that have lobbied to deregulate homeschooling in a way that has been very beneficial for allowing more families to do it and allowing more families more freedom in what they're going to teach their children.
Fortunately, there are some lobby groups to counter on the state level, like Them Before Us and Mums for Liberty. But this is a flashpoint issue, like so many recently, that betrays the truth that the institutions are not neutral. Schooling, the police, the government will be filled with a value normative direction of travel. And so if you leave it up to someone else, particularly someone who's been churned out by the university system, and if they're an English teacher particularly, couldn't get a job doing anything else because they're not particularly creative or smart, if you leave the education of your children up to them, their heads will not be filled with a neutral, holistic education. It will be filled with the values of that resentful midwit. So take it into your own hands. And that's why the government is so obsessed with taking away the ability to homeschool. That's why the Biden administration said that parents should not be the primary stakeholder in their children's education, because they see education as a way to mold your children in their own image, which is the progressive men of history.
Well, the state sees your children as their property.
Yes.
Fundamentally, that's what they see. They see your child and they see, one, someone new to propagandize, two, future taxpayer, so they need to be completely on board with everything that we are doing so that we make sure that they don't get involved in any political pressure groups against us or do anything against us. And if you want to know just how important families are, then you should check out this recent video when Shad came in to the office and appeared on the podcast and did some premium videos with us, which sadly I wasn't in that day. I really wanted to meet Shad.
He's a really wholesome guy.
Yeah, he's a really lovely guy. I've been watching his videos for ages, and I was off that day. I think I was off that week. So I missed him, but he had an excellent discussion with Carl where they were talking about fatherhood and, as Carl deems it, dadism.
Have you watched this, by the way?
No, I haven't.
So I caught it last night. It's one of the most wholesome things we have on the website. Shad got Carl to tear up. So
Nice.
it's well worth it for that, and not in a sad way, in a genuinely heartwarming way.
That's really lovely. Also, they look like mirror universe versions of one another.
They look like they've died and gone to heaven.
We've got Anglo Carl and Aussie Carl, and they're interacting, and yeah, they're in heaven right now, overlooking a mountain range where a giant father and his giant daughter are looking towards the stars. It's quite pretty. So Auron was talking about this, as I said, and it made me think to myself, well, I'll take a look into this as well. And the John Oliver segment seems to have been inspired by the fact that Washington Post, over the past, just on Tuesday, I think that is, posted this large article talking about homeschooling's rise from fringe to fastest growing form of education.
I wonder what inspired that. Maybe it's the sewage pipe you connected to the schooling system.
Yes, and you can see they've got a thing here. It's not working for some reason, but normally this is a animated little graph, and it shows that it's gone up over 50%. I think it ends at about 54% of an increase in homeschooling.
Good.
And they've got this graph, which is much more useful,
Cool.
which takes it. There are no data for, I think, around 11 or however so many states that is, because there are about 11 states in the US that don't require you to report if you're homeschooling. You're just
Oh.
allowed to do it, which seems pretty reasonable to me.
Yeah.
Mostly the Republican states as well, other than Oregon and Arizona.
And Maine as well.
Mm.
I think that's a Democrat
Illinois,
state. It's in, 'cause
Maine
it's
is
in
Democrat. Yeah.
yeah, because it's in New England. But the data that they were able to get from the states where you do have to report to the government, whether you're taking your kids out of homeschool, out of school to homeschool them, show that basically every single one of them, the only one that doesn't have, you've got New Mexico at 1% increase, and what's that one? MD,
Not Michigan.
it's next to
oh,
Delaware. That one is 6%. So there are some negligible ones, but everywhere is an increase, including places like California, Florida, New York has 103%, Washington, D.C. has an 108% increase.
Wow.
It might be Maryland.
Perhaps. You can correct me in the comments if you're watching this on the channel or on YouTube or on the website. So please let me know in the comments below. But let's read what they say in some of this article. So they say homeschooling has become by a wide margin America's fastest growing form of education as families from Upper Manhattan to Eastern Kentucky embrace a largely unregulated. So in the very first paragraph, they're making sure, because the Washington Post know that it's a trigger word. It's a trigger word for the leftist sleeper agents. They hear the word unregulated and they think, oh my God, they're
Yeah.
putting poison in the well.
Yeah.
But that's what they're doing in the article. They're poisoning the well, because you hear unregulated, and most people are going to go, this means that they're noncing children. This must mean that kids are being diddled, because that's never happened in a public school. Don't look into the rates of that kind of thing going on in American public schools versus the Catholic Church, for instance, because it really does make what the Catholic Church was indicted for look basically meaningless, even though it was obviously terrible what was going on there, because this kind of thing goes on quite a lot in some public schools. It's pretty horrible when you look into it. But they say it's an unregulated practice once confined to the ideological fringe, even though prior to about the latter 19th century, when America had a big push to implement public school systems, this was the norm. This is not some ideological fringe. This is not some unusual mode of human behavior. Homeschooling is how anybody in the past, outside of the 20th century, and even in lots of countries to this day, anybody who wasn't in the upper echelons of society had to educate their children, because you didn't have access to public schooling. You didn't have access to massive pools of public money that was being put to the use of educating other people's children. Most of your money would have been going into maintaining an army and funding state activities. It wouldn't have been going into educating your children. So you had to do it yourself. So the fact that they're already trying to poison the well by saying it's unregulated and it's an ideological fringe, it's completely unnatural human behavior. Can you imagine parents teaching their own children? God, why would I want to do that when I could be going on a cruise? Says the boomer mindset.
I was going to ask, do they make a clear definition of what fringe means? Because when I hear the word fringe as someone on the right, I think Azov Battalion. That's the first thing I think of is fringe. Those sorts of ideas.
They're trying to make you think it's bad, essentially. It's another byword for unregulated ideological fringe means you should be scared of it. It's the boogeyman. You need to watch out for.
Got you. So they don't provide a clear definition of what fringe actually means.
No, they just throw it out there as a concern word, is it?
Thought I'd double check.
Yeah, it's moralizing. It's very petty moralizing. The growth demonstrates homeschool's arrival as a mainstay of the American educational system. Ignore those hundreds of years that America existed as a colony, and then the states where it was just the normal thing you did. With its impact on society and public schools, and above all on hundreds of thousands of children now learning outside a conventional academic setting, only beginning to be felt. I just need to correct myself as well. It wasn't just that there was no state support for educating your children, you had to do it yourself. Oftentimes, these practices were kept within the communities, helped along by the parents, and also administered by churches. That would be where a lot of people got their education from. You get a basic education from the church. So you'll see later on when people start to go, oh my God, a lot of them are Christians, is actually a pretty normal thing going back into the pretty recent past.
Also, prior to industrial production, you had vocational training that you would learn from your parents. You'd have a family trade, you'd have a place of belonging in your local community, you'd have a predetermined role that was deeply meaningful. It's only because of the industrial and information economies that we have been inducted in institutional schooling, gotten a general education, separated children from their parents, and made them pliable to indoctrination. So this is a very alien way of human beings to find themselves in times, places, families, and meaningful vocations.
Yes, I'll carry on here then. So, obtaining accurate information about the homeschooling population in the United States is challenging in 11 states, including Texas, Michigan, Connecticut, and Illinois. Officials do not require notification when families decide to educate their children at home or monitor how those students are faring. 7 additional states have unreliable tallies of homeschooled kids, according to what the posts say they found. So, these are the statistics, and this is some of the information that Oliver goes over in his segment. So this is where he got it from, which is why I made the connection between the two, especially given how close together. I wouldn't be surprised if the people researching for John Oliver's show already had contact with the Washington Post and were aiding them in this, and there was some information being exchanged, because it seems to be a very coordinated effort, which is this article comes out a few days prior. On the 29th, we have articles like this being pushed in the Huffington Post. When you type in homeschooling into Google and look at news, this is one of the first articles that comes up, and I'll go over that in a moment. This comes out, and then John Oliver, the day after this article comes out, releases this. So it seems to be a push that is being coordinated. It's not particularly spontaneous, because nothing is ever spontaneous in politics. Everything is always organized. They carry on. In states with there's some interesting factoids that they put in here. In states with comparable enrollment figures, the number of homeschooled students increased 51% over the past 6 school years, far outpacing the 7% growth in private school enrollment. Public school enrollment dropped 4% in those states over the same period, decline partly attributed to homeschooling. Good. Homeschooling's surging popularity crosses every measurable line of politics, geography, and demographics. The number of homeschooled kids has increased 373% over the past 6 years in the small city of Anderson, South Carolina. It also increased 358% in a school district in the Bronx. Right. So it's not necessarily just down to white Christians taking their kids out of school because they don't want their kids to be taught how to perform anal sex when they're 5 years old. As much of that is a completely perfect and understandable reason to pull your kids out of school. It's people, I think, realizing the general deficiencies in public schooling systems in parts of America where you can send your kids to school. You don't know the education they're getting. They're probably getting a very poor education. They might be getting bullied because some kids don't fare very well in the social scenarios that school presents them. There are any number of very legitimate reasons to pull your kids out of school. And I think that it shouldn't just be that you are a conservative that you should be able to do these things. I think anybody, if you want and you have the resources, because I understand for a lot of people, when I have kids, I want to homeschool them, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to have the resources to do so and the time to do so, especially given the British economy. Who knows if I'll have the time? But if you have the resources and you have the ability to do so,
Why not?
why not? I think it's a good thing to do for your family, especially if at the same time you can put your kids in sociable situations where they can engage with kids of their same age so that they're not falling behind
Yeah, exactly.
socializing.
This is part of the thing with institutional schooling of the kid with the lowest common denominator behavior and intelligence level will often set the tone for the class because
Yep.
the teacher is spending so much time doing behavioral management and they might not be particularly
True.
competent themselves. They'll
So
probably
true.
be stretched thin. So the most disruptive and the least intelligent kid will dictate the rate of learning
Yep, it's
and
true.
also the
I
social
experienced it.
situations.
Yeah.
Yep, I had the exact
I'm
same
sure
thing.
we all felt that.
And-
I was that kid.
so we could tell, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And that's also the other thing of, oh, well, how will they learn to socialize that? Well, first of all, we were perfectly fine without being stuck around a bunch of strange kids for like a cohort of 30 to 100 kids. We formed well
You might
developed
have to
human beings.
you
for a
might
long
have to
time.
put effort into your own community rather than expecting the state to form that community for you.
Yeah, and you can value select for the kind of kids that your child makes friends with so you can make a much better formed person rather than the kids raising each other. That's like a child cannot transmit values to other children other than probably the most malformed child who is mature beyond their years.
But
So
in-
you want adults to raise children properly.
I have seen reports from inner city American schools where the teachers will talk about their inability to be able to police the students because they'll have often they'll be very demographically mono demographic schools where you'll have massive blocks of black schools and Hispanic schools, and the teachers will go in there and just be unable to police the children. The children, most of them, except for maybe one or two gifted students who really should be in a situation where they can actually learn rather than being distracted and bullied by everybody around them. Most of the kids won't be aiming for any kind of educational achievements. And then when the teachers try and put their foot down and try to say, listen, I'm going to set some order, this is what we're going to do, the public school system incentivizes principals, head teachers to turn around and say, no, you're not allowed to do that. That's discriminatory because that's their culture. For them to misbehave is their culture, so you're not allowed to do anything. So even if you are of a demographic minority and you send your kid to school and they are smart, they're gifted, they can achieve something, they are likely to be pulled down by all of the students around them. And the systems in place will not allow the teachers to do anything to support that child because they'll be too busy just trying to get through the day.
Behavioral management.
Yeah, it's terrible.
There's a big myth as well surrounding homeschool kids and public school kids in terms of social interaction. I think we see a lot of this idea that, oh, if you send your kids to if you homeschool your child, they will be incompatible with the real world. This is all these weird, I call them conspiracy theories, really.
Yeah, it is.
That that the kids won't be able to socially interact. They'll go to work environments and they won't be able to really interact with like their colleagues, their peers. But it's just a load of nonsense. There's prime examples. I mean, Brett Cooper is a prime example of someone who was homeschooled and has done extremely. Oh no, that's one person out of millions of children, but
And
still,
Claire Brimlow as well from Tim
Still,
Collins.
I
yeah,
think
there's so many.
I
good
think
examples.
the statistics bear out that most of the time homeschool kids surpass publicly schooled
Yes.
children in the rate of academic achievement.
Yep.
Oftentimes they'll get an education, a better education a lot more quickly whenever these things have been looked into. But I'll continue with some of this. So this is an interesting one. Despite the claims that homeschooling boom is a result of failing public schools, the Post found no correlation between school district quality as measured by standardized test scores and homeschooling growth. In fact, high-scoring districts had some of the biggest spikes in homeschooling early in the pandemic, though by the fall of 2022, increases were similar regardless of school performance. So it doesn't matter if the place that you're in has really good schools. The chances are that homeschooling has increased in your area anyway, because sometimes it is just that you want to have a greater connection with your children. Even if the school's great, you may not necessarily agree with the standards that they're setting, with the values that they're transmitting, and you might not just like the idea that somebody else is raising your own children for most of the day, that your children are out of your own hands and in somebody else's influence, because they like to pretend that children, without the state to intervene, are under the influence of evil, conniving parents who only want the worst for them, who want to transmit backwards and bigoted values to them, and that children should be allowed to flourish and come to their own conclusions. But that misunderstands the point and misrepresents it intentionally, because the point is not that children will otherwise be able to come to their own conclusions, it's they will be fed those conclusions by somebody who isn't you, because children don't really have the mental capacity or experience to be able to come to their own conclusions about the world, except for very surface level understanding. That's where adult influence has to come in.
Cool.
So that's what they want to do. They want to go, no, it's our values, not yours, that we're giving to them. And it says, this rise has been celebrated by home education advocates, but the rise has also led to critics of weak regulation
There it
to
is.
sound alarms. Homeschool kids don't have to submit to any form of testing for academic progress, except when, once again, you look into them, you find that they're doing much better academically than public school kids. In most states, and even states that require assessments, often offer loopholes, according to the Coalition for Responsible Home Education, which urges great oversight. Many of America's new homeschooled children have entered a world where no government official will ever check in on what or how well they're being taught. And that is partly the point, isn't it, really? I don't trust the government. I don't like the government. I think the government hates me and hates my values. So why should I let the government intrude on my personal
True.
life and teach my children to hate me?
Well, it
Agree.
classified a lot of dissenting parents that were showing up to school board meetings protesting said sexually explicit materials as domestic terrorists. So why would I trust that you had best interests at heart?
It's true.
There you go. And that moralizing tone continues on into the John Oliver segment that he did, where the points that were brought up, which was, he said, as I mentioned, that homeschooling community is much broader than right-wing parents afraid of hypothetical third-grade lube demonstrations. Okay, if it's only hypothetical, why did everybody freak out when Ron DeSantis and others decided to ban it?
Why can we name the books?
Yeah, why can
It's
we
true.
name the books, and why have I seen so many photos of the books in school libraries? That's a good question. He estimated, he found one estimate that had about 2 million children homeschooled in the US for reasons from social or health issues to fears of school safety to black families, capitalized black families, avoiding whitewashed curricula. So there you go. It's perfectly fine as long as it's for leftist values. They're not being taught leftism quite as efficiently as we would like. So it's fine for them to homeschool if they're going to be taught to be better progressives. If they're not going to be taught to be progressives, then it's evil and bigoted and reactionary. He says, many parents do not have the time or resources to develop their own at-home curricula. Oliver focused on 3 major publishers of homeschooling textbooks and materials, all Christian companies who purport to help learning through a biblical filter. And he said it's absolutely the parents' right to educate their children with any religion if they so choose. You know, he doesn't believe that. That is an absolute lie. No leftist believes that. But the quality of some of these books can be troubling. And he pointed to one history book that claimed the early 20th century witnessed a cultural breakdown that threatened to destroy the very roots of Western civilization. Gonna leave that one there.
Well, no, it literally did. When you kill millions of men, you don't have a...
It's almost like there was an enormous war that killed millions of people, but that obviously plays no part in the formation of culture. Another workbook by the company Ace celebrated the Confederate General Robert E. Lee as a devoted Christian who practiced his Christianity in all of his dealings with others. I mean, whether you think he was fighting on the right side of the Civil War or not, that's just true. And several biology textbooks purported evidence that dinosaurs and mankind existed at the same time. So you see what's gone on there is you've had 2 opinions that leftists disagree with conflated with one actually wrong textbook that's giving potentially false information.
James Dellingpole will be heartbroken that this is being taught.
So what they're doing there is they're saying, here's the obvious nonsense to finish it off with, but also here's things that are just opinions that you disagree with. And also facts that you disagree with because you're an insane leftist. Because of course you are, because you're watching John Oliver unironically. How was this in compliance with the law, he said? Because he also pointed that he managed to find one random example, which I don't even know is true, of a woman homeschooling her children who wanted to find Nazi-approved textbooks. And he uses that to paint a blanket brush over all potentially conservative homeschoolers and say, see, they just want to read Mein Kampf to their children.
It's like, yeah, bad. Can we also talk about the bumming books in schools? No, you're just going to deny that?
No,
All right, then you're not an honest actor.
No, I'll keep denying it until you outlaw it, at which point I'm going to say that you're a homophobe. How was this in compliance with the law? The main answer, said Oliver, was the powerful homeschooling lobby led by the Homeschooling Legal Defense Association, the HSLDA, Oliver conceded, grew out of an environment in the 1970s and 80s where homeschooling was overregulated. Once again, you know, he doesn't believe that there is such a thing as overregulation, and in some places banned. But over 4 decades, it has grown into a powerful hardline lobbying group with a conservative Christian bent. Ooh,
scary.
When you get all the scare words out there because leftists reading this Guardian article and leftists watching this are supposed to then know that they're supposed to call their local senator, their local politician, and say, we need to reduce the influence of this particular lobbying group. Ignore the fact that most lobbying groups are not in the interests of the people, if you want to describe it that. Most lobbying groups tend to be in the services of the establishment, and most of these people don't care about those. They only want to get rid of the lobbying groups that lobby for greater influence of parents over their own children. And I think the situation that's going on in America at the moment with homeschooling is great. I think it's fantastic. They've had a rise in it.
Right.
I think it's fantastic that parents have a lot of freedom over how they want to raise their children. But that's what this coordinated effort is trying to change. And the last thing I wanted to highlight was this article that I referenced earlier, which is an extended and then everybody clapped article. It's from the perspective of a woman who says, I'm the creator of a girl empowerment business.
All right, I'm already not listening.
Opinion discarded. We created curriculum kits that use stories of notable women in history to teach girls about their worth and potential. I am
She lists the women?
I think Harriet Tubman is one of the ones that's listed in there.
Okay.
I'm the writer and researcher, and B, my business partner, and one of my favorite guy feminists, a cuckold, is the creative and marketing guru. Worthless opinions all around. Don't listen to this woman. I don't want any curriculum generated by this particular person, but I'll carry on. She says she's gone to over 20 homeschool conferences. Her company has lots of supportive and excited customers. However, there's a faction that prickles at our presence whenever we're at one of these. B and I try to brush it off, but even the smallest splinter, when not addressed, can cause an infection. So people who disagree with my progressive feminism are a literal infection that need to be cut out, is the implication that I'm getting. A mum enters our booths at the exhibitor hall in Missouri. Okay, my daughter loves Harriet Tubman. Tell me what you got, she says. I explain our product, how we use historical women to teach girls about their worth and potential. The mother says, but is it woke? I mean, I don't want to teach my daughter about woke. I look at around at our curriculum kits. They're all women who fought for equality. And I think to myself, hell yes, it's woke. The irony is lost on this potential customer. What do you mean, woke? I ask. She opens her mouth. Half words and phrases stumble and tumble around. A few talking points from news sources fall out. Finally, she sighs, I don't know. Just tell me again what you write. And everybody clapped. Everybody gave a rousing applause. I was handed a Medal of Honor by the president himself. And the entire article, which is quite long, to be honest, and these have all stopped working again, so you'll have to trust me on that one. The article's quite long, is just one after the other. It's just saying, I encountered a backwards conservative person, and then I owned them by asking them what they actually meant by woke, because none of them really know what woke is. So this is a smug, insufferable idiot who thinks they're better and smarter than you, trying to humiliate you by reinforcing leftist understandings as those on the right as being backwards and bigoted and uninformed about people. And that's what this whole thing is. They want to pull back homeschooling so that women like this can be in charge of your child's education. You don't want it. And they're coming for the homeschoolers. They will be trying to create more and more coordinated attacks on people homeschooling their own children. So you need to be aware of it. And you need to probably, if you're in America especially, be joining these lobbying groups so that you're able to have a degree of influence and push back against this.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the premium videos, this one on the politics of Barbie. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.